When we think of Formula One legends, we often picture drivers like Lauda, Senna, Prost and Häkkinen. But these icons wouldn't be the legends they are today without the influence of one man, Ron Dennis. He was the mastermind who transformed McLaren into a powerhouse, ushering in one of the most dominant eras in Formula One history. Under his leadership, McLaren didn't just compete, they dominated. His teams clinched 17 world championships and won 158 races. What made Dennis exceptional wasn't just his ability to win races. He revolutionized how Formula One teams operated, bringing a new level of professionalism and innovation to the sport. In many ways, he helped shape the modern Formula One we know today. This is the story of a man who dreamed big and worked tirelessly to turn those dreams into reality. Ron Dennis began his Formula One journey as a mechanic with the Cooper team, later working for Brabham and Lotus. But Dennis was a man with big ambitions. He wasn't content with simply tightening bolts and changing tires. He dreamed of running his own racing empire. In 1971, Dennis took his first big leap. Along with his friend Neil Trundle, he formed Rondell Racing. It wasn't an F1 team, not yet, but it was a start. They ran cars in Formula 2 and sports car racing, backed by Motul, an oil company. Things were looking up, and Dennis was on his way. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. Just as Rondell was gearing up for an F1 project with a car designed by Ray Jessup, disaster struck. The 1973 oil crisis hit and Motul pulled their funding. Instead of giving up, he dusted himself off and got back to work. Dennis regrouped and returned to Formula 2. He ran cars under the Marlboro banner, including one for a young, wealthy Italian named Andrea De Cesaris. It was during this time that Dennis's Project 4 team also prepared and ran a Marlboro-sponsored car for the legendary Niki Lauda in the Pro Car Series. While Dennis was busy building his reputation with Project 4, the once mighty McLaren F1 team was faltering. After James Hunt's championship in 1976, the team had lost its way. Team leader Teddy Mayer and designer Gordon Koppuk struggled to adapt to the new ground effects era. Here was where fate stepped in. There was a link between Dennis's Project 4 team and McLaren, Marlboro. John Hogan, the marketing director at Philip Morris, Marlboro's parent company, had been watching Dennis closely. He liked what he saw. Hogan had lost faith in Mayer's leadership and saw in Ron Dennis the spark of genius that McLaren desperately needed. With Marlboro's backing, Dennis orchestrated a takeover of McLaren in the fall of 1980. It was a monumental gamble. Dennis was betting everything on his ability to turn around a struggling team. But he had a plan, and more importantly, he had the vision to see it through. Dennis wasted no time in putting his stamp on McLaren. He hired the brilliant designer John Barnard, who was at the time one of the most innovative designers in the sport. Together, they created something revolutionary. The first carbon fiber monocoque chassis, the McLaren MP4-1. It was lighter, stronger, and safer than anything else on the grid. This wasn't just a new car, it was a statement. McLaren was back, and they meant business. Speaking of game changers, you know what else is revolutionary? Smashing that subscribe button. Just like Dennis transformed McLaren, you can transform our channel by joining our pit crew of subscribers. Trust us, it's the fastest move you'll make all day. Now let's get back on track with the Dennis saga. Dennis knew that a great car was only part of the equation. He needed power and he needed drivers. For power, he partnered with Mansour Oja, who funded the development of a Porsche turbo engine, badged as TAG. As for drivers, Dennis pulled off a masterstroke. He convinced Niki Lauda, a double world champion who had retired from the sport, to come back and drive for McLaren. This was a sign of things to come. For 1984, Dennis brought in Alain Prost to partner Lauda. Now, think about this for a moment. Two world champions in the same team, with a car and engine package that was the class of the field. The result was what you would expect: dominance. McLaren won 12 out of 16 races that year, with Lauda taking the title by just half a point from Prost. In just 4 years, Dennis had taken McLaren from also-rans to the best team in the world. It's the kind of turnaround that legends are made of. But Dennis wasn't content with just one great year. Oh no. In 1985, Prost took his first world title. In 1986, despite fierce competition from Williams Honda, Prost did it again. Dennis was building a dynasty. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that would shape F1 for years to come. In 1988, Honda decided to partner with McLaren, and they brought along a certain Brazilian driver named Ayrton Senna. Prost and Senna. Can you imagine a more potent driver lineup? It was like having two lions in the same cage. The McLaren Honda MP44 they drove that year was perhaps the most dominant car in F1 history. Out of 16 races, they won 15. Out of 1,031 laps raced, it led 1,003. These are the kind of statistics that make grown men weep. But with great success, often comes great challenges. The harmony that had existed in the team began to fracture. Prost and Senna, two of the greatest drivers of all time, became bitter rivals. Their battle came to a head in the 1989 San Marino Grand Prix, where Senna broke a no-overtaking agreement at the start. The tension culminated in the infamous collision at the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix. Prost and Senna crashed, Senna was disqualified, and Prost won the title. Dennis was in an impossible position. One driver was champion but leaving the team, the other was threatening to quit the sport entirely. How do you manage a situation like that? Dennis, ever the diplomat, sided with the team, arguing that a win had been unfairly taken from them. It was a delicate balancing act, trying to keep both drivers happy while also looking out for the team's interests. But all good things must come to an end. Williams-Renault began to challenge McLaren's dominance, and Honda's withdrawal after 1992 left Dennis scrambling for a competitive engine. The mid-90s were a period of transition for McLaren. Gone were the glory days of Senna and Prost, replaced by a new generation of drivers. Dennis, ever the innovator, secured a partnership with Mercedes-Benz. It was a new era, symbolized by the switch from the iconic red and white Marlboro livery to the silver of West. But Dennis wasn't done yet. He lured Adrian Newey, the design genius behind Williams' success, to McLaren. It was a statement of intent. McLaren was coming back, and come back they did. With Mika Häkkinen at the wheel, McLaren won back-to-back Drivers' Championships in 1998 and 1999. Dennis had done it again, rebuilding McLaren into a championship-winning force. But even as McLaren celebrated these successes, a new challenge was emerging. Ferrari, under the leadership of Jean Todt and with Michael Schumacher at the wheel, was building a dynasty that would dominate the early 2000s. Dennis, never one to accept second best, made a bold move. He signed Fernando Alonso, the man who had ended Schumacher's reign for the 2007 season. But Dennis had another ace up his sleeve, a young British driver named Lewis Hamilton. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Was Dennis's decision to pair Alonso and Hamilton a stroke of genius or a recipe for disaster? On one hand, he had two of the most talented drivers in the sport. On the other, he was recreating the volatile Senna-Prost dynamic. Some say Dennis knew exactly what he was doing. He was confident in Hamilton's potential and loyalty to McLaren. What Hamilton needed was a strong motivator to unleash his full potential early in his career. And who better to provide that motivation than the reigning double world champion, Alonso? The 2007 season was like a powder keg waiting to happen. Hamilton, in his rookie year, was matching Alonso race for race. The tension within the team was palpable. But was this all part of Dennis's plan? Had he deliberately created this rivalry to push both drivers to their limits? Whatever the intention, the result was explosive. The relationship between Alonso and Hamilton deteriorated rapidly, culminating in the infamous qualifying incident in Hungary. Dennis, the master manager, seemed to have lost control of his drivers. But that wasn't the worst of it. The 2007 season would be forever tainted by the Spygate scandal. McLaren was found in possession of confidential Ferrari documents, resulting in a $100 million fine and exclusion from the Constructors' Championship. It was a body blow to Dennis and McLaren. The team that had prided itself on its professionalism and integrity was now embroiled in one of the biggest scandals in F1 history. How did it come to this? And more importantly, how would Dennis and McLaren recover? The aftermath of Spygate saw Dennis step back from his role as team principal in 2009. It was the end of an era, but not the end of Dennis's influence at McLaren. He focused on expanding McLaren's road car business, overseeing the development of the MP412C and the P1. But the law of F1 proved too strong. In 2014, Dennis orchestrated a return to power at McLaren, ousting Martin Whitmarsh. It was a reminder that even after all these years, Dennis's passion for racing hadn't dimmed. His final act as McLaren's leader was to secure a works engine deal with Honda, rekindling the partnership that had brought so much success in the 1980s. But this time, the magic wasn't there. The Honda power unit was unreliable and underpowered, leaving McLaren struggling at the back of the grid. As McLaren's on-track fortunes declined, so did Dennis's position within the company. In a bitter irony, the man who had built McLaren into a powerhouse was now seen as an obstacle to its future success. In 2016, he was placed on gardening leave and eventually left a company he had shaped for over 3 decades. Dennis brought a level of professionalism and corporate sophistication to a sport that had often operated on a more informal, even amateur basis. He showed that running an F1 team could be more than just a passion project. It could be a severe and multifaceted business. And what of the man himself? Those who worked closely with Dennis describe a complex character, demanding and sometimes difficult, yes, but also inspiring and fiercely loyal to those who earned his trust. He was a man who could quote Shakespeare one moment and deliver a blistering technical analysis the next. A man who saw no detail as too small, no ambition as too great. This man was indeed a genius.